These two badass arms might be the best way to knead your dough yet. They simulate natural stretch and fold movements of your hands. But how good are they really? That's what I want to find out today, reviewing the Italian monster, also known as the Bernardi My Miss Baker. Guten Tag! A little bit of a background story. I recently started a series on where I was opening up my own delivery bakery. And for the first bread that I made, the first bread that I sent out, I was just using my hands. And of course, this can scale up to 2 breads maybe, but at some time you want to have a stand mixer. Then I've chatted with a few people, including Daniel from Mama Napoli. And I also to reach out to Laszlo on Instagram. Seriously, he does all sorts of crazy bread experiments. Check him out. Anyways, both of them recommended that if you want to go professional, there is just one stand mixer that you want. And that's gonna be an arm mixer from Bernardi. Seriously, when I saw some footage of some of the arms kneading, I was thinking, okay, I need to test this machine. This is exactly how I knead my dough by hand. I wanna try it. The problem though, upon checking the prices, this machine comes at a price tag of around $1,600 US. Quite a bit over my budget. And that's what I got thinking, why not reach out to Bernardi directly and ask them whether I could be doing a review with one of their stand mixers. And they agreed to provide me the My Miss Baker for as long as I'm trying to set up my own bakery. All they asked for is a review of the product. With this upgrade, I can skip from just making 1 bread up to making 8 breads at the same time. That's gonna be a big time saver. Okay, so let's test the product now. Hi Bernardi. Why would you want to have an arm mixer, you might wonder? The problem is that the default mixers are not so good when it comes to kneading sticky doughs. It sounds weird, but sometimes kneading those doughs by hand is more efficient than using a stand mixer. That's because those mixers typically don't get the whole dough. And I've tried a lot of them. They all work well for not so wet doughs, but when it comes to making sticky doughs, they have their issues. Just quickly grabbed the paddle and the default dough hook. This is the default dough hook, and it simply doesn't do very well when it comes to fetching all that sticky mess of a dough. The paddle, on the other hand, might work. But with the paddle, you have one issue. You create a lot of friction. Your dough is gonna heat up. So if it only heats up a little bit, that's no problem. But if you have to knead for a longer period of time because you really use a lot of water, then your dough might stirring apart at some point. Plus, if you run a large bakery where you rely on a fixed schedule, a few degrees of change in temperature could mean that your dough is ready 5 hours faster than the day before. This is nothing you want. So you ideally want your dough to have the same temperature all the time. So yeah, and that's where the arm mixer comes into play. It will just go through the dough and it will stretch and fold over the dough. Pretty much exactly the same thing that you do when kneading by hand. By the way, if you want to knead by hand, I got 5 amazing tips to create incredible dough strength. It's really the best way to make a superb dough. Check that out. So yep, that's exactly what the arm mixer promises. Working for high hydration dough and not overheating the dough. Now the stand mixer itself is rather heavy. It's around 25 kilos, which is, I just researched, 6.6043 gallons of water. By the way, did you know that 1 kilogram of water is exactly 1 liter? Mind-blowing, isn't it? Now, I did have a small issue while I was recording the video. I made my own homemade beer and I tripped on my hand. Well, actually, I was tasting my own homemade beer. So please apologize, my hand is okay now. But back then, yeah, it was hurting quite a lot. But still, I really wanted to continue on that bakery project, so I really had to get that video out of the door. But I was surprised when this device arrived. It's a huge machine. It's not like my previous Bosch stand mixer. It's probably 2 times the size. So I'm not sure if I could actually keep this in my kitchen all the time. But yeah, because of that, I can now make a lot of dough. Please consider though, if you're the kind of person that has to move this device, 25 kilos is really a lot of weight. So I wanted to try 2 different doughs. One default dough, which is a pizza dough, a bread dough, or a baguette dough, which has around 60% hydration. That's 60 grams of water per 100 grams of flour. A pretty default dough that works with almost every flour that you can find. And then secondly, afterwards, we're gonna be doing a test with a dough that has around 80% hydration. That's gonna be a quite sticky, a very challenging dough to handle. When you knead by hand, your hands are gonna be a mess. I'm just gonna be opting for yeast. I'm not gonna be making a sourdough dough, but you definitely could. In fact, I'm gonna just be using a very, very tiny bit of yeast. It's really so little that I need to use a special scale to actually measure it. And yeast doughs can be great too, but please give them a lot of time to ferment. That's really the trick with most of the doughs long fermentation time. That's because the amylase enzyme breaks down the starch, converting it into sugar, and the protease enzyme converts the gluten into something more digestible. That's also why you only get that super open crumb if you ferment your dough for a long time. I did it again, didn't I? I got sidetracked on the actual topic. Usually there's so much information that I want to share with you. I'm gonna be comparing the Bosch tool with the Bernardi tool. But please note that this is also not a fully fair comparison. The Bosch is a multi-purpose tool. It can do a lot of things at the same time, whereas the stand mixer from Bernardi just does one thing, and it does that really well. It kneads the dough. But still, I think this is a good way to demonstrate how an arm mixer works in comparison to a regular stand mixer, and whether something like this could be worth an upgrade for you. A little bit sort of like me, I'm a full stack developer, so I do both back end, which is like databases, and front end, which is what you can see. I'm not really good at anything. I can do everything a little bit. But then there are also highly specialized back-end developers and front-end developers. I think you get the point though. It's a specialized tool that just does one thing, whereas it's a tool that does everything, but doesn't do everything particular, I guess, so very well. With kitchen supplies, this is always the case. Choose between one device that can do everything, but it's not very good at one particular thing, or something that just does one thing and it's really a master at doing this particular one thing. Sorry guys, if this gets a little bit too much, if I talk too much. I also added chapters to the video so that you can skip ahead to the parts that interest you the most. This is frequently what I get in the comments. Hendrik, your videos are too long. Put everything into a 1-minute video. Yeah, I'm terribly sorry for that. I'm really trying my best to not get sidetracked anymore. So let's focus. This is a nice dough being mixed. We are adding all the ingredients. So all the doughs have been put together, and then I set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes. Seriously, it was really hard doing all this with just one hand. The My Miss Baker only has one speed setting, but to show the efficiency I opted for the low speed setting as well on the default stand mixer, just to see what's gonna happen. There are even bigger Bernardi models, and then they have different speed settings. But they don't matter so much, as I found out after doing all my tests. So one speed setting is definitely enough. It doesn't seem like a lot of speed when those arms go in, but you'll be surprised. So yeah, then I just stood there mouth watering, because it was so satisfying to see how the stand mixer was kneading the dough. Like with my hands, I felt so lazy. I seriously felt like opening up a beer and just watching somebody do this hard work. And it was so oddly satisfying, always the same movement, the dough, how it came together. It was really oddly satisfying. By the way, there's a cool subreddit called Oddly Satisfying. You want to check that out. There are so many great videos on there. So on the low speed setting, normally I go a little bit higher. After around 5 minutes, you could see that the dough wasn't really coming together so well. Whereas with the Bernardi, the dough was already looking quite good after 5 minutes. And yeah, it only has one setting. So I was surprised how fast I was able to build dough strength with the machine. After around 10 minutes, the full 10 minutes, the Bosch dough still wasn't there. The Bernardi dough was looking quite good. So what I like to do is I like to increase the speed a little bit on the stand mixer. What's gonna happen is the hook is gonna take the dough and it's gonna toss it to the walls of your bowl. More like a slap and fold. There are some people advocating for the slap and fold technique when creating dough strength. Please don't do that. Regular stretch and folds are gonna get you the same dough strength. Slap and folds just create you a gigantic mess in your kitchen. The problem with this approach is though, that at some point you create a lot of friction, your dough starts to overheat. More on that a little bit later. Probably if I would have gone for a higher speed setting on the Bosch right away, the dough might have been there after the first 10 minutes. But overall, I can say that in this category of around 60% hydration, looking at all the facts, the Bernardi didn't really outcompete the Bosch. As I said before, a higher speed setting would probably have leveled everything out. But now it gets really interesting. Now we're gonna go to a higher difficulty. Sticky dough. Yep, this is what I was really looking forward to. Making relatively sticky doughs. I like doing that for my doughs because what's gonna happen is it's gonna create a very extensible dough. It can inflate a lot more. Compare it to inflating a car tire versus a balloon. A balloon can be inflated much easier than a car tire. Actually, this was one of the points that wasn't so liked in my previous video on the bakery. The dough was a bit too fluffy. But if you want to go to that fluffy area to really get a super open crumb and make a nice artisanal bread, then that's what you want. And this is always where my default stand mixer has issues. And in fact, I like to just use my hands in that case because it's just so cumbersome. It simply doesn't work so well with my stand mixer. There are probably other brands that handle this better, but with the default setup, and I've been testing a KitchenAid, I've been testing a Kenwood, I can't say that I'm 100% satisfied. That's also why I've delayed upgrading my stand mixer for such a long time. I didn't find the device that I was really looking forward to. But yeah, most people have told me use the paddle please, but even when I tried that at my mother's place with the Kenwood, it didn't work so well. So yeah, it's cumbersome, and if a machine can do this for me, that would be great. So let's test this. So exactly the same dough again, except from 60% hydration up to 80% hydration. By the way, this is something that's unique for every flour. This is something you have to figure out. This was such an aha moment for me when I started to bake. Every flour is unique. Don't just blindly trust water values that you find in recipes. So when you want to replicate this recipe at home, it might be that 80% is too much for your flour. Oh, I wanted to continue, but actually, yeah, that's why I also started this channel, just to show people, don't just follow a recipe, you need to understand it a little bit. I set a timer again for 10 minutes, and the dough was more like a soup rather than an actual dough. The Bosch really didn't know what to do exactly, it was just stirring around like crazy. With the Bernardi, I could see that there was some dough strength developing. But then to my surprise, the Bernardi also left a little bit of flour on the bottom of the bowl. Maybe this is just because I was making a very small batch of dough. Then I took measurement of the temperature because I wanted to know whether one machine overheats the dough more than the other. But at this low quantity of dough, I couldn't notice a major difference. All of them were at the same temperature. Interestingly though, the Bernardi machine was a little bit hotter from the outside than the Bosch. But please note, Bosch is also an expert at making electrical engines. So I'm quite sure that maybe the motor is a little bit more efficient. To fully test this, I would probably need to max out both of the machines in terms of dough weight. So even after 10 minutes, the dough still didn't come together so well. So I set another timer for another 10 minutes. And I returned to see how nicely the Bernardi dough came together. It was so satisfying to watch. The Bosch still had some issues, the dough was still sticking to the bowl. So yeah, in this experiment, I'm really happy with how the Bernardi is able to handle the sticky doughs. And for the packaging, it actually says that the My Miss Baker, the cheapest one, is not so good at handling high hydration dough. But at 80% hydration, this worked really nice. It took a while, but the dough came together so well. The dough didn't overheat or anything, so this is exactly what you want to make the perfect dough. It seems that the dough is just very good at kneading. And I have a funny story to prove this. I work 3 days per week as a software engineer, 2 days per week I'm running this channel. And so I was making some dough for my colleagues for a Christmassy time. And then I was in a meeting, nice thing about working from home. And the meeting took a lot longer than I expected. I was kneading the dough for around 60 minutes. The strange thing was the dough really didn't come together, and I thought, okay, maybe I just added too much water. So I added more flour, and I kept kneading. And I kept kneading this dough for around 3 hours in total probably. The dough simply didn't come together. And I suspected maybe it's just a bad batch of flour that I used. Then I posted this on Instagram, a few people commented, nobody could really say what was the difference. My dough simply didn't come together, and then at some point when I decided to bake it, the bread was all sort of white, really strange. So the next day I made another dough again. Same package, and the dough came together. So I was previously making a video where I said you can't over knead, but I think the problem here is something related to the starch, something broke down, maybe the gluten broke down, I don't know exactly, maybe you have an idea. And I totally over kneaded the dough. I couldn't do that in my Bosch stand mixer even after kneading for an hour. So I think this is super interesting. It just shows how efficient this Bernardi machine is at kneading the dough together. I wouldn't throw it away, it was still a delicious bread though, of course. It was just looking very strange. And I had to use a loaf pan to actually bake it. Loaf pans are totally underrated, by the way. So obviously the main difference between the two machines is the mixer and how much dough you can handle. So I tried again the Bernardi, this time with around 2 kilograms of flour and another 1.5 kilograms of water. And yeah, it nicely worked. The dough came together. It was such a big blob of dough. I never made so much dough in my life. That was really cool to see that I could finally do that I could finally scale up my production a little bit. One thing though that I don't like about the My Miss Baker is that it's so hard to clean. You can't remove the bowl. So I had to put some water in there, try to clean it. It was a big mess, I didn't like it. It would be really nice if you could remove the bowl. With my other stand mixer, I just toss all of that into my dishwasher and I'm done. With the Bernardi My Miss Baker, that doesn't work. Definitely something I think that could be improved. So Bernardi also offers bigger machines. I have the My Miss Baker, but there's also the Miss Baker. The Miss Baker has 2 different speeds for kneading the dough. However, I can say, for me, even at the current rate, my doughs came together quite well. I don't know if that's worth the extra investment. Then there's also a touch screen, but do you really need to have a touch screen on your stand mixer? The only thing I could see why you might want to consider doing the even bigger upgrade could be that you can handle even more dough. My machine is for around 3 to 4 kilograms of dough. The bigger ones can handle way more, of course, but they're also heavier. So if you're the kind of hobby baker that likes to make bread for friends and family, then the My Miss Baker from Bernardi is definitely a stand mixer that I can recommend to you. It really makes it very easy to work with high hydration doughs. It's really a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to see how the dough is coming together. Please consider though that it's a relatively heavy device with 25 kilograms. It also takes a lot of space, so you will definitely need to have that space. I can't wait to test the device further. I'm hoping it's gonna help me with my plan to open up my own delivery bakery. Hope you had fun, hope you learned something new, and as always, may the gluten be with you. Mix my dough, mix my dough.